Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Stefanos, a third-year PhD student at University College London, and in the next 10 to 12 minutes, I'll be talking about our research into exploring the security culture of companies that use operational technology. So to start with, OT is a bit different than traditional IT. It's basically any hardware or software that monitors and controls industrial equipment, assets, and processes. And there's many differences between OT and IT. In the interest of time, I'll just mention briefly that OT's life cycle is typically in the decades, whereas most traditional IT gets replaced in 2 to 5 years after it's been deployed. And that has some implications on how they are secured, as quite often operational technology has been there for decades, might have not been designed in an era where cybersecurity was a concern, etc. But if we move to companies that use OT, they've, over the past 10 to 15 years, have been increasingly digitalizing. You've probably heard that under names such as Industry 4.0, Industrial IoT, etc. And while that brings many benefits to these companies, this increased connectivity also increases their security risk. And as these companies often operate critical infrastructure in sectors like water, energy, and transport, the EU has regulated them through the Network and Information Systems regulation back in 2016 to 18. In our case, since this study is mainly focused on the UK, that was done in 2018. And it's quite important to secure those companies as there's a potential for physical impact after a cybersecurity attack. We can think of the Colonial Pipeline as one such incident last year where an ransomware attack led to the loss of availability of production and fuel shortages in the US. And in a similar trajectory, these companies over the past 4 to 5 decades have developed a strong culture of safety following high-impact accidents and regulation. And as we are now currently in the cybersecurity era, I've kind of decided to focus my PhD on this rather broad research question of how is security culture developed in those companies. More specifically for this paper, we wanted to focus on the greatest organizational and human barriers. And as this is still in its infancy, cybersecurity is still on its early maturity stages in these companies, we wanted to highlight how security consultants and security solution vendors, which are external stakeholders, contribute to overcoming these barriers. To do so, we've interviewed 33 professionals with a security background from 25 different companies. And while we initially started with a focus on the water sector and trying to talk to internal security practitioners, we quickly realized that most sectors face similar problems, and as such, we expanded to include external stakeholders as well. And we've actually identified 3 such barriers, starting off from the most structural one. The governance and management of cybersecurity in these companies is still a bit of a gray zone. Their responsibilities might not be there. And the typical story is that you've got an IT function who has traditionally been tasked with information security, and at some point in time is also now tasked with operational technology cybersecurity. The problem here is that most of the OT is owned by the engineering and operations functions, and as such we have a clash as we've got 2 different functions who have grown organically over time and have quite distinct reporting lines. This also has some implications on how budgets are allocated, as each function is more comfortable in asking budget for what they've been doing for years. IT in doing information security, operations and engineering in maintaining their assets. And this leads us to the second and third barriers. There's an overall lack of OT cybersecurity expertise in this space, where most professionals who can call themselves OT security experts typically don't lie inside those companies. Rather, there's a situation where it's either people with a security background, but not much experience in an operational environment, or on the other hand, there's people who have grown up on the tools with decades of experience in operational assets. And those two barriers kind of compound to the third one, which is the lack of communication between these functions. And I'll let the quote speak for itself. I wish I could use it as my paper title because it describes everything I've been trying to say for the past 6 minutes. But we want to emphasize that we think those three barriers are caused partly by the different security mindsets that these broad functions have. IT is a much more standardized approach, a much more mature approach, whereas OT cybersecurity needs a more contextualized and localized approach, as there's a variety of technologies under the umbrella of OT. And again, there's many, many different processes that these technologies are responsible for, ranging from power distribution to wastewater management to manufacturing. More importantly, though, people on a typical IT cybersecurity professional will care about the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of their data, whereas people at the operational side care more about the safety and availability of their systems. And that in turn makes them much more reluctant into any potential change or even probing into their systems, as these are generally not systems that you can simply turn on and off, and any potential change can affect their safety and availability. Which leads us to the second research question. We wanted to highlight how, given the landscape in OT cybersecurity in the past 5 years, companies facing this internal lack of expertise had to resort to external consultancy. In our case, we bundle consultants with security vendors, as we've seen a move by security vendors to offer this more of a consultancy piece in their offerings. But nevertheless, we provide many examples in our work of how these stakeholders help overcoming these barriers. They implement technology, they design policy, and they advise on roles and responsibilities. They raise awareness and share knowledge to key stakeholders inside those companies. And more importantly, they also act as mediators between functions. And we have many examples where those external consultants who are perceived as both experts in cybersecurity and operational technology have bridged the functions together, the IT functions and the operation functions together. Of course, that kind of leaves the question open of how we can take those consultancy assignments and those collaborations and turn that into a stronger organizational culture. But nevertheless, to conclude, we do believe that consultants and vendors do have a role to play at a key early stage in this company's cybersecurity journey. They are more or less external stakeholders which are not often referenced in the wider literature about how a security culture develops in companies, as they're quite key in developing processes, implementing technologies, spreading awareness, as well as changing behaviors in those companies. And that's what we wanted to highlight in this paper. And more or less, the three barriers we've identified, those of governance, expertise, and communications, should sound familiar to you. They exist in most companies. However, we think that in companies that operate operational technology, these issues are amplified by the fact that the underlying technology is different, which means that security teams have another hurdle to go through before they can actually properly secure those systems. And with that, I plan on researching other stakeholder groups for the future and hopefully getting a US perspective or a more global perspective on those things, as this research was mainly done in the UK. But I really think the SOUPS community would really be interested in studying operational technology personnel as distinct user populations, and hopefully be using this slide and those different security mindsets that IT security professionals and OT security professionals have. And I think that brings us to the end of our talk. Thank you.